I'm Denise Miller. I've chosen to share the Ugly Duckling story with you today because for me that's where storytelling sort of began, at least professional storytelling. I was working as an outdoor pursuits instructor at the Strathcona Wilderness Centre just outside of Sherwood Park in Alberta, and we all had nature names. It was a very nature-oriented program, and my nature name was Swan. Now, Swan, taking on that name Swan was a whole nother story of self-identification, realization, the same as for the Ugly Duckling story, so I won't go into that now, but I was Swan. And my boss at the time was an amazing woman called Carol Smith. Now, Carol Smith, she had the ability to really see others' gifts and the generosity of heart to really help you to promote it. Now, I had already been storytelling at the John Jansen Nature Center in Edmonton, and I was bringing storytelling when a group would get tired, snowshoeing, canoeing, whatever along the way, we would tell a story. And we were getting positive reviews, and so Carol brought in Gail DeVos, a prominent storyteller, wonderful storyteller from Edmonton, to give us workshop on it, the instructors, and she offered it to the community as well. And so I took that workshop and learned the story and told it, and didn't really go any further with it. And Carol, well, she brought back Gail for level 2 storytelling and suggested strongly that I should be involved into that one, and so I did. And still I didn't pay much attention to this gift she was seeing in me that I wasn't really seeing yet. And so then the next thing that happened was that she said, hey, they're starting a new storytelling group in Sherwood Park. Helen Lavender, prominent storyteller as well, great storyteller. She and Jean Burgess, a few other ones, were going to be starting this group, and did I want to join? And I was not really interested. I was a young mom at the time. I wasn't that young, but my kids were. And so I wasn't really interested, and she just said, well, I would really like your company, and so encouraged me along, and along I went. And joined, it was Tales Strathcona, we called it. And so that was the beginning of Tales Strathcona, maybe 30 years ago now. So really excited today to be here to share the story with you, celebrating Tales Alberta and its new birth as well. So thank you guys for inviting me along, and I hope you enjoyed the story of the Ugly Duckling. I'm going to tell you one of my favorite stories. Now, we all have favorite stories. Sometimes they're favorites from very young, and so it takes us a bit of looking to find out why they're our favorite stories, but we all have them. When I was young, we didn't just have video movies to go and watch, of course, and many of you may not have your favorite story being in a book. You may have it being in a movie, something like that as well. So this one is my favorite, and it touched me in a lot of ways. And so when you do find a story that touches you, you may want to search at why. Why is that story so much of interest and so important to you? So this one to me is a story by Hans Christian Andersen, and it's called The Ugly Duckling. The story begins on a warm spring day. The leaves are on the trees, beautiful sun shining down, and there's a mother duck, and she's sitting on her nest. And she is snuggling all of her feathers, covering over a whole bunch of duck eggs. Well, she thinks they're all duck eggs anyway. Now, she waits and waits for a certain number of days, of course, and then she starts to hear the little cracking and picking and peeping that she knows means that her new babies are coming. Now, she's on a farm, and there's a lot of farm animals around too, and so lots of other ducks are coming by and checking on her, seeing how she's doing, and she's happily watching these little baby ducklings be born. Beautiful little balls of fur that look just like they have every other year. And then, when she hasn't heard any little cracking or peeping for a while, she thinks she's probably done. So she steps up and looks, but there is still one more egg there, the biggest one of all. And so she thinks, oh, I should still just sit back down on that egg. And then a friend of hers comes by, another duck from the farm, and the duck says, now I had an egg like that in my nest one time. It wasn't a duck egg, it was a turkey egg. And the mother duck had never heard of something like this, and she said, a turkey egg in your nest? And she said, yes. I wasn't even sure it was a turkey egg, I just knew that it didn't look like the rest of the babies. And then I took them swimming and wouldn't get in the water. That's how I knew it was a turkey, not a duck. Make sure you don't have a turkey in there, my dear. And off she went, gaggling and cackling as she did on her way. Now the mother still wanted to sit on this egg. She'd been giving so much time to it. She sat and sat for another quite a while, and then she started to hear some more cracking and peeping, and she thought, oh good. Then she got off the nest and looked, and the new baby duckling was born, but it didn't really look like the rest. It was kind of big and gray and stumbled around, and she thought, I wonder if it's a turkey. I wonder if it's a turkey. And so she waited and waited until this new duckling was strong and all of them were ready. And then she thought, I'm taking him down to the water. I'm going to go down there and see if it's a turkey. And so she went down to the water, waddle, waddle, waddle down to the water. She jumped and glided out into the water. And every one of the little ducklings, they all just jumped and splashed into the water and caught up to their mom. And then up came the big, ungainly, kind of gray one. And it jumped in the water too and started following the mom. And so she was happy. She said, okay, it is a duck. It just is so ugly. Oh, I wonder how I could have had such an ugly baby. And off she went on her way, paddling around. She paddled around and she led the little line of ducklings behind her over to a place closer to the farmyard so that she could introduce her babies to the oldest duck of all. The oldest duck of all was very gracious, usually meeting all the new babies each year, and this year was no different. She was just sitting there, and then the new babies went by, and then she saw that one at the end, the one that was gray, the one that was so big, the one that was so ugly. And she said, what are you doing with that baby? What are you doing with that one? You should get rid of it. You should leave it behind. And the mother didn't know what to do, but she said, this is my baby. I'm going to take care of it. But she did wish to herself that that baby just wasn't quite so ugly. Now she took all of the ducklings into the farmyard, introduced them around, showed them where everything was. They scratched as much as they could with their little web feet, and they picked at things. And all the other animals, they kept coming up and looking at this ugly duckling and saying, what are you doing here? You're too big. You don't look like the rest. You shouldn't be here. You don't look like anybody here in the farmyard. You should go away. And then little duckling started to feel very bad. Started to feel very badly for himself, that he wasn't like everybody else, and how could he be smaller? And he tried to make himself look smaller, and he tried to make himself look yellower, but it just didn't work, and everybody started chasing him around. They were chasing him and chasing him so hard that he just couldn't stand to be around them anymore, and he just flew over the fence and landed out into the wildlands outside of the farm. And he didn't really know what to do, but he just started looking and looking. And then he came across some wild ducks, and he came up to them. He thought, maybe I'm a wild duck. And he went up to them, and they just started looking at him and saying, who are you? You don't look like us. Get away, get away. And just like the ones on the farm, they chased him away. They chased him all the way to some other animals, and they didn't like him either. They said, who are you? What are you? And they chased him away, and they chased him away. And he ran and ran and ran until finally he got to the point where he saw these amazing birds out on the water, and he just looked at them and he thought, they are so beautiful. Now he'd never seen these birds before. They were swans, and swans, well, they were white and they were big and they were beautiful and they were so graceful, and he just watched them with longing in his eyes, just wishing that they would accept him. But they didn't even see him because he stayed hidden. And then they just flew away, and he watched them fly away, and they looked so beautiful as they flew. Now he just hid on his own. He hid from everyone. And it started getting colder and colder as the time went by. It started getting colder and colder until the lake got so cold that it started to freeze over. It started to freeze over, and he had to keep swimming and swimming and swimming so that he would try to stay alive. He kept swimming and swimming and swimming just to keep the water open around him. He swam and he swam and he swam until he was just so tired that he couldn't swim anymore. And then he just thought, okay, I don't belong anywhere. I'm just going to stay here. I can't swim anymore. I can't try to fight for myself anymore. Doesn't seem like there's anything here worth fighting for. And so the little duckling, the ugly duckling, just fell asleep. And the ice came forming around him. And the ice formed around him tighter and tighter. And when he woke up the next morning, he was so cold and he was barely alive. And he thought, this is okay. I'm just so tired of this life where no one will accept me, where no one will care for me, where no one will see me as someone valuable. And then, the next thing you know, a farmer went by. A farmer went by, and looked over and saw this little bird in the water. And this farmer was so kind-hearted, he just couldn't stand to leave the little bird alone in the water. So he took his hatchet and he chopped and chopped away the ice. He tucked that little ugly duckling inside of his coat, and he brought the duckling home. Now, he knew that the duckling needed to be let go into the wild, and so he didn't try to make it a pet, but he took good care of it. He kept it warm, he kept food and water by that duckling, but he left him alone. And the duckling just felt more alone. He said, even this one that will save me won't even like me, won't even care about me. But he was grateful to be getting this food, even though he wasn't sure that he really did want to be there. He said, I should have just stayed out in the lake. I should have hidden myself better. And then finally when the spring came, the farmer said, okay, it's time. And he went to the shed where he'd kept that duckling safe and separate from everybody else, because he didn't want to make it into a pet. He knew wild animals should stay wild. And so he took that little duckling down to the edge of the water, and he just set the duckling down into the water. Now the duckling spread his wings, and his wings were much bigger than they had been before. And he stood strong and proud, and he thought, I've grown quite a bit over this winter. And then he saw those swans, the ones he'd been watching the year before, and they flew down and they glided down and they landed on the water very close to where he was. They looked at him and he looked at them, and he just thought, maybe they'll just kill me off and that will be the end of me, and I won't have to live in this horrible way any longer. And so he bravely just put his wings out and glided over to those, and they came at him so quickly he was sure his life was over, and he just bowed his head down just to submit to their beauty and their grace and the truth that he didn't belong anywhere. But then when he looked down into the water, he saw the reflection of them. He said, well, that's the swan, that's not me, that's a swan, that's not me, that's a swan. And then he realized, I'm a swan, I'm not a duckling. And the other swans came gliding right over to him, and they welcomed him, and they said, we didn't know who you were, but we're so happy to have you with us. Come and fly. And together they flew away. And the ugly duckling, who never was a duckling, belonged with the swans. And that's the story of Hans Christian Andersen's The Ugly Duckling. Thank you again for joining me at Stories Connecting Canada, denismiller.ca. Hope to see you again soon.